So just for a brief introduction is that I met Michael as a film score reviewer, and he reviewed a few of my early film scores, and then he started his own record label to release. What the original intent was to release independent film scores that would have no other outlet. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, the background story is a bit more complicated and maybe more. There is more to it, but in short, that's correct. Yes,
And
yes,
I was fortunate enough to be the first release on his label.
yeah. You were unknown soldier.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep. And that's grown into a label that has released 300 CDs at this point or so. Correct.
Yeah, albums, not
Albums.
CDs.
Right.
In
Okay.
this era, yeah, of course. But I think it's closer to 400 now, actually. But I think that 50% of those are digital only. Yeah.
And as as a background, Michael is also an excellent choral composer. He writes beautiful music, and I've heard performances of it. And he also does some concert producing. So he's a man who wears many hats, and he does all of them extremely, extremely well. So
Thank
really
you.
fortunate
Thank you.
enough to have him here. And so what I thought we'd do today is I'm just going to ask a few questions and let you talk, and then switch some subjects as we had sort of had a little bit of a chat about it, and then the students will probably have questions for you as well.
Hmm.
So why don't we start off with your work actually as a composer?
Hmm.
If you want to talk
And
about that a little bit,
the question is,
talk a little bit about your work as a composer.
yeah, okay. First of all, my background is in journalism, and I have always been writing music and playing the piano. And my father was a touring musician here in Sweden, and my I had a grandfather who was a church musician, so the background was there. But my father always encouraged me to do something else, not go into music, because he was in the business when it was really going downwards. He was out touring, playing, basically old-fashioned dance music at the time when the disco era hit, and so he encouraged me to seek other opportunities in life. So I chose to go into journalism, and I was a news journalist for 15 years. Um, and that was also the time when I was writing about film music, and when I reviewed your music, Pete, and a lot of other albums, and interviewed dozens or even hundreds of film composers, ranging from up and coming talent to really established and sometimes even legendary composers who's not with us today. Um, that was something I did, and after 15 years in journalism, I felt that it was time to try and do something else. And I had always wanted to try to find a way to make a living out of music. And the first, of course, given my passion for film music, I wanted to try that out. And I had a few connections in the independent film business, people who were working there was a producer who was working in what do you call it, reality shows. So I actually got a few TV scoring gigs. So I did the Swedish Top Model series, for instance, and there were a few others. And I found that to be interesting, but not very. It really didn't speak to my soul to write that kind of music for a for not that super serious kind of show that Top Model was, even though it was a lot of fun to just do all of the suspense music for the voting moments and stuff like that. But at the same time, I discovered choral music, and that was because I actually discovered singing and discovered my own voice when I was 35 or something like that, very late in the game. Here in Sweden, I don't know, maybe it's the same in the States and some other countries as well, but singing in choir is second to hockey, ice hockey, and football. It's the biggest, the biggest hobby that Swedish people can enjoy. What they do in their spare time is to go to the church and sing, or to join a community choir. So it's very common, but I discovered that very late. All of my choir friends, they sang since they were kids, and I just discovered this. And in one of my first rehearsals with a more ambitious choir, a chamber choir, I sat in with the choir, and they were doing a program with American not film music, American choral music, and there was one piece by Eric Whittaker, who is a superstar in choral music, a piece called Water Night, which completely changed my life. Just that, those 4 minutes sitting in and singing that piece was life-changing for me, because I really discovered how, the harmony and the connection with words and the lyrics, and something I had never been interested in before. And I found that there was some kind of weird connection between how you underscore poetry and how you can underscore images and a narrative, that there is sort of a connection. You can write absolute music, and you write music for its own sake, and everything is there in the music. But when you have film to score, you are sort of obviously underscoring what's going on, and it's a bit of the same when you write to lyrics in a choral work, that you're underscoring the lyrics and the subtext, and just the way you do film scoring. So I think that was why that attracted me to seek that out. So I wrote a piece. I picked one of my favorite poems in Swedish and just tried to set that to I think it was 6-part or 8-part mixed chorus, and just to try that out. And I handed that score to my conductor, who I didn't know very well at that point. Now we're very good friends after all these years. Just asking for her advice to see if she is there something I should do different. And what we all do as composers when we are insecure in terms of both technical and aesthetic aspects of it. And but what happened was, for the next time I saw her, she had made copies of the piece and handed out to the choir, and decided that we were going to do it in our next concert, which was, of course, encouraging very much for me. So that was the first step. And then I've been writing choral music for now 12 years, something like that, mostly sacred music, used in service or in concerts. And I've done some bigger concert pieces as well, for choir and string orchestra, and a few things, just instrumental things as well, orchestra and string orchestra.
Can I interject here for a sec? So
Yeah.
One of the things that I like about your music so much is the harmonic sonorities that you develop, and the timbres that you get out of the choir, and that you only write the amount of notes you need. I never hear any extraneous stuff in your music. It's very it's very direct, and yet it still manages to achieve a really wide depth of emotional output, right? So, can you talk a little bit about how you are so economical and yet able to achieve so much
Effect.
expression, let's say?
That's interesting because what I hear a lot is that I have I mean um, my first priority in writing for choir is always harmony, because what you get in terms of overtones and stuff like that with a human voice in a room singing together is it's unique. It's close to a religious experience, I have to say, because when you hear those overtones, if the choir is good and if the intonation is spot on and not tempered like a piano, but rather the correct exact tuning, um, it's magic. And that's why I think harmony is a priority for me, and it also interests me very much what you can get out of that. So my problem is usually rhythm and melody instead, because that's the next step for me. So I always begin with harmony. um, I was going to say, what people say is that I think it's been changing a little bit, but there's been I like to write these cluster um, dominated music, which tends to not be that economic in terms of how many. I mean, I've written 16-part clusters sometimes in some, but it's of course not for a whole piece. It's how you do it. There is no effect in that if you do that all for a full piece. So I think that's and it all comes from the words, really. It all comes from the lyrics. It's not very often that I begin with um, just from one idea. The seed is always some kind of context, which is the text or when it's going to be sang, um, or in case of a string piece that I wrote. Because I'm a producer as well of concerts, all the concerts that we do with the choir, we were going to do Requiem by another composer, which required a small string group. And we decided to do a piece by, I think it was Richard Strauss, and a very well-known and popular piece by Max Richter on the nature of daylight with that string group. But we didn't have an opener for that concert. So we said, I'll do that. And when you have that specific, you know exactly what's going to come afterwards, what piece is going to come after that piece, how can I, to think about the bigger whole. That is also stuff that determines whether you write economical or if you stretch it a little bit more. It's always, I mean, there's no music always has a function, I think. Even if it's very intimate, there's always a function in it.
What I meant by economical was that you don't write. You might write thick cluster chords, but it's not busy with like 5 million things going on at the same time. Right, that's what I meant by the economical part of it. And the thing about the choral music, what you're writing, and how I would relate it to film music, is that its main function is to tell a story. And that's really
Very much.
that's what I sort of have been teaching the students here about. Story, story, story. It's really is king, and how your music is supposed to fit in with that. They all actually just finished scoring their first actual piece of film. I have the trailer for Loving Vincent that I set up for them. They just last week they handed it in, and I was we spent up until I assigned that, we just looked at music by composers and had them write music using the principles that we would discuss. And I was actually pleasantly blown away by actually how many of the students got it and started incorporating those techniques into the stuff that they wrote, all in the service of telling the story of the film, which relates to writing choral music as well.
That's great. That's great. Yeah.
So okay, so let's talk a little bit about your work as a reviewer, and you know, I used to go and read the site that you were writing. I forget what film music something or other. I forget what it was called. I used to have it bookmarked back in the and I used to go read. I used to go read the reviews all the time. It was very interesting for me because there'd be all these people that I have no idea who these people are. You know, just like many people had no idea who I was either. You know, and but you know, there's a nice review of a film score.
Mm-hmm.
So if you could talk about that a little bit, and you know,
Yeah, I'd love to talk about that because I still think that's very interesting, especially in a time where access to film music has changed a lot. I mean, anyone can go online now and basically listen to either commercially released film music on Spotify or YouTube, or they can go to a composer's website and listen to demos and stuff like that. And they can go to SoundCloud and listen to stuff there. When I was reviewing film music, reviews had a bit of a different meaning or purpose. What I'm saying is that people back then, they were going to buy a CD and they were going to spend their hard-earned money on that CD. So it was more of a consumer orientation thing. Also, of course, I mean, I really wanted to try to contribute something when it came to how we look at film music as an art form and what it is and how it develops and all the various all the various trends that you see. I remember so well when there was the what's it called, the duduk, when that became such a popular instrument to incorporate in mainstream film scores that even didn't have any really cultural connotations that would normally inspire someone to use that instrument. That color was so popular for 2 or 3 years, I would say, and you could hear it in basically any Hollywood score. And there was one musician, I don't remember his name, but he was playing on all of those scores. So I hope that he's doing well now. It's been a few years since he was in demand for those. I mean, I was very interested in that, and I wrote so many film music reviews, and I always had this discussion, which I think is interesting for what we're talking about now. Is I was always writing reviews about film music and how they worked away from the film, without the images, as a standalone work. And I had these discussions with some film composers who said to me, thank you, but you should really not review the film, the music out of context, because it was not written for a CD. It was not written for, that's not the purpose of the music. And I said, I understand that. Of course I understand that. But on the other hand, someone somewhere at some point made a decision that the music should be taken out of context, placed on a CD. And my idea was, if you do that, you should also, that's also embodied in that is the idea that it's a standalone work. Otherwise, why would you put it on a CD? So and that was an ongoing discussion, which I think still is very um, a common dispute, I think, in that world. It's not a lot of people who write reviews about film music, but should you be able to evaluate a film score away from the film or the TV show or the game, or should it always be judged in context? And I think that's interesting, because one of the main things, also when you read interviews with, when I did interviews myself with film composers, is that some of them have the ambition to write music. They say, I would never do this if I didn't feel that the music was also, interesting on its own, that it has value on its own. And other film composers go in the completely other direction, and they say, that's completely not interesting at all. The only thing that matters is the function of the music, that it works well and supports the film and the narrative, and that it does exactly what the director or the producer of the film asks for. It's the only thing that matters for them. So I see a very it goes in both directions. I think it's more of the old school composers who tend to go for the more wanting to have some kind of self-contained value in the music, while most of the composers come from the younger generations. I don't even know if they really think that way. I think it's more, it's very focused on the function. Also, at the same time, I think that we as listeners have become much more accustomed to listening to media music now, out of context. So I don't think that the listeners are that picky anymore. We are used to listen to film scores away from films these days.
Or you could listen to film scores in different contexts, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like, if
figure skating,
right, or just anytime, like in a comedy show where they want to do fake drama, you might hear the Jaws riff. It's also some music, though. I think, not to interrupt, but some music is really not actually listenable in a like, it's listenable, but it doesn't really make sense without the film. I mean, like, I don't know if you've heard the score for Eraserhead, but it's
yeah.
it's like this incredibly eerie. It's almost like electronic noise, and we actually go over that in the film later on in the semester. But like, how does that work without the film?
Yeah, I agree, and I think it's the same. But it depends so much on where you have your own frame of reference. I think, because some people think that that's. I mean, if you can listen to an improvisational 12-tone percussion piece in a concert hall for 20 minutes, some people would think that that's unlistenable as well, and that's written for listening purposes only. So I mean, it all depends on the angle you take and where it come from.
Yeah. Also, some films become like part of the lexicon of people, right? So the typical John Williams scores, very incredibly popular music that a vast number of people have seen. So that music is sort of like part of the lexicon of your life, because you've most likely seen one of his films many times. And you can sort of relate back to that when you're hearing the music.
Absolutely. And I think, I mean, in terms of Williams, his music is iconic. And his style is iconic. And if someone else writes music in that style, it's gonna be a very familiar environment for any listener today. But 25 years ago or something like that, his music was considered to be much too. Even though he did the concert arrangements, of his film music, even those arrangements were considered to be, too lightweight, or not interesting enough to perform in a concert setting by most concert halls. That has changed now. I find, well, maybe that's for a later question, but I found that when I'm working with orchestras as a concert producer to put on film music concerts, one of the most interesting things I see is whenever they're gonna do film music these days, they're not that interested in the quality of the music. They just want the big titles.
Right.
So
I think that's also a commercial aspect of that, because people, as far as orchestral music goes, that's the only modern or currently, composed music that most people have heard that has orchestral instruments in it.
yeah, and I mean, it's fantastic that most people. I've written pieces about this. I mean, as a journalist back then, I remember that when I wrote about film music in just a mainstream news magazine or something like that, the angle was that most people experience a lot of orchestral music. They experience hours and hours of orchestral symphonic music every week or every month at least, but they don't know that they do that. But it's fascinating how much orchestral music and symphonic music is actually consumed.
It's sort of like under the radar, under the radar of being aware of it.
Mm,
But if
yeah,
it wasn't there, you would probably definitely notice it. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
So, all right, my next question would be, since I look at you as somebody who's heard and really listened to, and I think that you've got your finger on the pulse of the industry in terms of you review music by incredibly successful composers and sort of people that are on the less known spectrum.
Mm.
What qualities do you find present in the works of, like, are there any similar qualities? It doesn't have to be musical qualities, but what qualities do you find present between the most successful composers? Like, are there any similar qualities that they all share that you could think of as, like, a young person trying to score films, something that you should have in the back of your mind,
I think that, of course, there are two things. It goes in two directions again, which are quite really opposite. On the one hand, if you're completely original, if you have something truly original to offer, and if you come from Europe or Asia, and you're not an American, there's a bit of prejudice here. But if you have a voice already, or if you have you have a different way to you have some kind of offbeat quality that makes you stand out, then that can be your ticket. But it usually comes with um, having early relationships with filmmakers who also make it. Look at Ludwig Göransson, for instance, the Swedish composer who made it big now with Mandalorian and Black Panther. I mean, where he comes from is a completely different. He comes from the rock and pop business, and he's been doing a lot of producing. But he was a university buddy with the director of of Black Panther, and they've continued. And I think Ludwig has a very special way to approach film music, because he doesn't come from that. I always say that the best, in my opinion, most interesting and best film composers are the ones who has a cross pollination between other genres and film music. Like, for instance, Pete, you with your jazz, which really translates and makes your film music interesting. And it's the same with Ludwig, but on a different in a different genre crossover. That's the one thing. I was thinking about Hildur Gudnadottir as well, the Icelandic composer, the cellist who wrote Joker and Chernobyl. Very, very special voice. The way she works is super interesting. And I don't think that she's the type of person who hangs out at every networking event in LA to get a gig. And I think it's the same. It was the same with Johan Johansson. They knew each other, of course, but the late Johansson, who died a couple of years ago, also a very special voice, and also a crossover thing in terms of genres. But then you have on the other side, if you decide to be a film composer and that's what you want to do, and you don't want to be performing in clubs doing jazz, and you don't want to do choral music for church, whatever, you just want to do film music, then I think that what's very common, the most common thing that they have is that they are excellent, the most successful. They are such excellent collaborators with very, very, very easygoing egos. They are not gonna blow up because they have to rewrite a cue. It's part of the job. They know what's part of the job, and they are interested in. I think they are super invested in the final product, meaning the film, not the score, the film. I think that's the most. If you look at Hans, of course, the most successful of them all, he's famous for his interaction with filmmakers, how he is able to interpret, help the filmmakers to arrive at what they want to do, but maybe can't express in words. And all of the people who is with that guy, and I mean, John Powell came from that through Hans' team, Harry Gregson Williams. I mean, there are so many, and they all learned this. Even put yourself aside. The thing that you need to make use of from yourself is your talent and your instinct. But all of the it's all about the film and the collaboration, and that's when it becomes, I think, fun to do film music. I guess when you collaborate, when you actually connect. I mean, can you imagine writing music for a film where you're always on a collision course with a filmmaker? Why would anyone want to do that?
Well, that is interesting, though, because relationships are all different, right? So, you always hear about these people whose lives are like the War of the Roses, right? But they sort of they stay together.
That's true.
I can't. I personally, I think it's interesting. One thing I try to impart upon all my students in all my classes is that when you're going out to network and meet people, most people view networking as, I'm going to meet somebody and they're going to do something that's going to help me out, right? Maybe hire me for a gig or something else. And I often say to them that, no, what you should do is try to make friends with people and see how you can be of service to help them out.
Exactly. Yeah.
right? So you're being hired to be part of a team,
Mm.
right? And so you have to take care of your area of that team, but there's always at least one, probably more people above you in the food chain that you have to be subservient to and realize that they have other considerations of the big picture of the film as opposed to your I'm writing the music for the film.
Mm.
So when you can get beyond the fact that you are the center of the universe and realize that you're part of a team and you're there to make other people look good, like the directors and the producers, you're there to make them look good and help them be successful. That's sort of what I teach about networking, you know.
Mm. I think that network. That's one of the biggest issues I think a lot of composers fight with is the networking aspect, because it's a personal thing, of course, but you don't want to go to networking events and that it would feel superficial, and you're just there um, for the for the potential results of the networking. You have to be interested in people. You have to be it needs to be the real thing. You can't go to those events and not be there for the people you're going to meet. You have to. I think you have to. The best kind of networking events are, of course, the ones you don't realize are networking events, where it's more of a side effect. I mean, if you're a nice party or whatever, and it turns out that there's a famous director there, and you happen to chat to him, and you talk about life and good wine and jazz and whatever for 2 hours, and then he says or she says, by the way, I'm a filmmaker. That would be the perfect scenario. That's never going to happen, I guess.
Yeah,
But
that's interesting. Well, just from my own personal experience, the people that I work with, I've been working with some of the same filmmakers for 15 or even 20 years, and I've worked on multiple projects with them. I'm doing projects now with people I started working with in the early 2000s,
mm,
and we've done dozens of projects together, and they're friends of mine, and I, it's so funny because one of the things I never do with them is talk to them about money or anything like that. I mean, I get paid for what we do, but I do the job. And if it takes me an extra, week to finish the job, I don't like get on their case and ask for extra cash. I just do the job and finish it, because they hire me over and over again. Now,
mm,
obviously, you're going to have to know when to turn the spigot off when people are taking advantage of you. But like after 15 or 20 years, I understand that they're not doing things to take advantage of me. They're getting stuff thrown at them by the networks that are hiring them that they have to deal with. So they not only have to deal with me, they have to deal with the editor, with the guy who's mixing the film, and with any new talent they have to get, and they have to sort of get all that stuff going on.
mm,
And it seems today, and I don't know what your take is on this, but there's more levels of approval that are necessary for a project before a project sees the light of day, because I think the costs of making a film are so astronomical that they want to make that money back, right? So that having that many levels of approval before something is finished can cause a lot of rewrites and conforming music to new edits.
mm.
So I'm not sure if you have any thoughts on that, or do you see that
Well,
happening?
I haven't seen that happen that much since I'm not in that. I come in film music. I usually come in uh, when there is an afterlife for the music, either in terms of an album production or a concert rework of a piece. But I think that I'm positive you are absolutely right about. It depends a little bit, because if you're on a completely independent movie, it might be the other way around. That it's
Yeah,
super easy.
correct.
There's
I agree
just
with you.
one guy. I mean,
Yep.
but if you're if you're writing for a network, stuff that's going to go on one of the big networks, or even a smaller network, or if it's a bigger film in any country, I think, and not only the US, I think everywhere there's much more control, and everyone knows what to expect from a demo, and everyone knows also that there's a lot of composers fighting for the work, to get into. So I think that's one of the things I see a lot. It's that a lot of young, extremely talented composers, they really struggle to get their work, to get a lot of good work, I would say. That's my wife.
Oh, I've never actually met your wife, Lena, right?
That's Lena, yeah. Yeah, do it.
Hey,
Hi,
nice to meet you.
Hello. I hope you have a good time.
We do.
It's late here in Sweden, as you know, so
Yes.
I'm going to bed. Have a nice evening.
So we have a question from Donna Doyle. She's a fellow faculty member at the college. So her question is, since absolute music in the European tradition relies on its internal organization to create coherence and a meaningful experience, how does this enter into evaluating music that depends on something extra musical for its logic and meaning?
That's a fantastic question, I have to say. Is that related to the reviewing of albums of film music?
Yes, yeah, it is.
That's very interesting. I think
earlier discussion. Yeah.
Yes. I think that maybe it comes with maybe the angle there is to. I have never thought about that question before. I think it depends on where you come from. If you come from the field of evaluating music or reviewing music, with that set of principles, that would be, I think, anyone reviewing a film album would be confused by what they hear, because it's a different set of rules, I think. It really is. But I mean, it comes very much down to how the album is produced, because a film score in a film cue is, of course, very much dependent on what goes on the screen and the narrative, but it can still have musical coherence. It can still have a structure which is musical, and it can still have if the album is well done, which I'm very much working on now in my with the label that I run, is to put a lot of effort into making a good musical experience out of the film score, which means you have to turn it upside down sometimes. You have to put the final piece at the beginning. You have to structure it.
Right.
You have to introduce the thematic material at the beginning. You have to, if you have some kind of musical instincts, that's what you do. So I have a bit of a problem with albums that present film scores from 1M1 to 6M6, as I usually say. Just the chronological, for me, doesn't work. But what I said before was that listeners today are becoming accustomed to that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think they are. I am thinking of opera overtures, where the composer reworks the material to form a piece that has its own coherence.
Yes. that's similar to what some composers do. Film composers, if they have the time and if they have the budget, it's still not. I mean, it happens at least that they do a special suite.
For concert audiences, like the suite.
For instance, yes, or even like Michael Giacchino, I know that he likes to do a suite, and sometimes these suites are actually the offspring of the first demos that they did, because some composers, I don't know what you do, Pete, but some composers like to demo for a film or for a project by doing like a suite of thematic ideas and stuff that could go into the final product, and sometimes that actually is what turns up in the end as a suite from the film.
I actually write a library. Typically, I write like maybe 10 or 15 2-minute pieces of music with a theme, some variations on that theme, some alternate ideas, and I let them listen to that. But it's interesting, two things. I've watched Junkie XL. I forget on what YouTube video it was, but he's got his series there of all these different, how he works. But he was playing like he had written a 20-minute suite before he started scoring a film, right? Which was this incredibly complex piece of music that he sequenced. It's all sequenced and everything. And then we had Jeff Rona on 2 weeks ago. He talked about he has a bunch of pieces of music that he writes all in one sequence with like maybe a little space in between. And he gets the director over to his space and they have a listening session together. And he has everything all in one sequence. But I typically don't have people come into my place. I work typically over the internet and I send out files for people to listen to. So for me, having the individual tracks is a little bit easier because then they don't have to go. It's at minute 15 and 30 seconds. It's like, Q3, I like that. And I like parts of Q4. That sort of works better for me, but that doesn't get into having a suite that has any logic to it. It's just music that I think.
But those demos, are those demos usually done completely without pictures?
Correct.
And that's very interesting that if you demo to do something, because I think that's the most common scenario is if you do that, you wouldn't write to any kind of picture.
No, but I'd write to a conversation and I take notes on the conversation. I just don't start writing music. I have a conversation with the filmmakers and they tell me what they want and I have to listen and decipher that and make that into music. And they actually at times, like for example, I scored this film for ESPN called Pat XO, which was about this legendary women's basketball coach, Pat Summitt. And they were very specific that they did not want orchestral music, that they wanted the music to be very roots oriented. And I wrote a bunch of pieces and they wanted it to be raw and like not even high quality recordings. And so I went on eBay and I bought a $30 a static like CB radio mic, ham radio mics from the 1950s, and I had to buy a bunch, like 5 or 6 of them to get a couple that worked. But I recorded acoustic guitars using these old microphones, right? So I didn't write anything to picture, and almost all those cues ended up somehow being. Some of them went in the film with just some editing, and then some I had to recreate and actually score the picture. But to make that the suite or all those demos, that's done after quite a bit of conversation with the filmmakers. So it's not as abstract as you might think.
Well, what I was thinking about is that if you write this is a question to you. I hope it's okay for me to ask questions as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Because I'm thinking that if you write music away from the images, there is and you demo that, and the filmmaker goes, "Wow, this is fantastic." Isn't there a risk that the demo is much too self-contained, and that the music is actually that's not going to work in the it's it's too, like you mentioned with the Junkie, it's super complex and it's so super impressive, and it's all the tone is right, but there's too many layers. Maybe it wouldn't work.
Right. Then you actually score the film. Right. You're right. Then you actually score the film. So like maybe I would like if there were like in that one score I was just talking about, I had some percussion I played on there, and maybe the percussion had to be taken out, and and thin out the music considerably to make it fit better. Yeah. So
yeah, I see.
So we have another question from another professor at the college, James McElwain, and he says, "What do you hear in scores that is yielding or not to a less linear technique like game scoring, loops, and background scoring?"
Oh, let me. I'm not sure that I understood that question.
Jim,
because of the language barrier, I think.
Yeah, Jim, can you repose that? Like, you can speak if you have your microphone set up.
Okay, I'm here. My question is that game scoring is actually quite a different domain for composers and is loop based. Very much like hip hop underscoring today or whatever, and that is occupying a lot of compositional time, both games and hip hop, using looping software, because the games themselves and the raps themselves are based on looping content, or at least flowing over looping content. So nonlinear to me means that kind of writing where it may go twice, it may go 4 times, and then there may be other loops on top of it, but not all synchronized to some theoretical zero like Mozart wrote, or John Williams, or whoever your composer du jour is, right? In other words, let me make a difference here. How about the effect of looping and game scoring on the score to Beast from the Southern Wild? That was a Dan Romer score.
I have to say, I'm still not super sure I understand, but there's of course a big difference between scoring drama in film or a narrative in a television show compared to what you mentioned. It's seldom, I would say, that looping 4 bars work either. The only instances I see that work is when you have an action sequence that actually, or a montage that goes on for 3, 4, 5, 6 minutes, and you want to bind that together, and then you can build that up by using the looping technique and adding layers on top of that, and then taking the main beat away as they go back to a different, they intercut that with sub-story from another, part of the world maybe, and then back, and then you can have the loop going on underneath. That's where I see it work. And of course, it's also a stylistic thing. If you're in that urban environment in a film score, where that type of music actually makes sense, then I see it as well. But otherwise, I think it's still very non-linear. The films, what you hear in film music.
Okay. Thanks.
Does that make sense? Did I answer your question?
Absolutely. I mean, there's linear composition, which we've practiced since the early Renaissance, and before that, it was nonlinear, very, very frequently.
Yes,
especially in terms of ancient like Ambrosian chant or Mozarabic chant. Then that all changed with the fall of the Holy Roman Empire, I guess. Such sweeping generalizations, but that was. And that persisted for another 500 years. But with the scoring technology now that is tending to be not only object-oriented, not as a 4-bar slice, but as this many seconds or minutes or milliseconds. Uh, reducing sound qualities down to truly milliseconds, if not microseconds, to use as almost like an EQ device. I mean, there's. I don't want. I'm getting off topic at this point, but there's a new tradition of not observing the rules as they are, the rules as we inherited them from Bernard Herrmann or whoever. And
I think, yeah, I think that's absolutely right. But what I see, what I mentioned before, is that's something that listeners are being more and more used to as well. So that it makes sense to listeners these days that there is no apparent structure like that.
It's interesting.
That's what I think I see.
So let me just interject here. So one reason, when I'm teaching this class, I don't teach music before 1950, because a lot of music before, even though there's a lot of great music written before that, the typical, a lot of that music is out of context quotes of classical works, right? And it wasn't until, in the 40s it started happening, but the first film that we teach is East of Eden, where, and we go forward from there, where you're now getting into like, this is real film scoring here. And even though, like I said, there are film scores from the 1940s and earlier that are fantastic works, but somebody like Franz Waxman is quoting Mozart and Beethoven and Haydn in their scores, like out of context from the original piece that it was written for. And it just becomes something that goes on, that works for that minute without having a long range meaning in the unfolding of the narrative. And so that's where, like in sort of the 1950s, for me, is sort of the cutoff. Although David Rax in the 40s certainly wrote some amazing scores, for sure. But I just sort of start off with that because the recording quality is also better at that point.
That's very interesting. I think I agree with you.
Yeah, Jim, I got that.
Yeah.
Oh no, Jim just made a comment about Waxman equals Wagner. And I was doing that. Yeah.
Certainly. Yeah.
Okay, so another question I had for you, Michael, is in recent years, European film composers have had a lot of success in Hollywood. Right? And so what do you see? What trends do you see in the European music that's different than music that's based from, say, let's say, an American composer, if you can hear or discuss any kinds of differences?
Well, it's interesting. It's a very interesting question. But to be honest, I mean, there has always been a fascination with European composers in Hollywood. I mean, the story usually is usually when it's Oscar time, if there is a European composer, preferably French or Polish, that guy is gonna win the award. And there's some bitterness there. I mean, we have had Kaczmarek, we've had Delary, Maurice Jarre, and some of the Italians. It's not something new. Maybe that wasn't what you were saying. But,
well, there just seems to be a lot of composers from Sweden, Norway, from the almost Scandinavian countries that are doing really well. I mean, I don't know if you'd consider Iceland or Greenland Scandinavian countries, but it just seems like people in that area seem to be getting traction. I mean, you mentioned the guy who scored the Black Panther, right, as being somebody who's Swedish, and then the cellist, right? There seems to be a lot of traction for those kinds of people who come from Europe and that particular area. And
you know what I would say? I would say that the European composers who attract a lot of interest in Hollywood, they're not doing that primarily because they're European. They are of interest primarily because they carved out their niche in a different genre that happens to be en vogue. Minimalist, neoclassical, Max Richter, and these are music makers who write for film, ballet, electronic presentations, museums, anything. They write their music, and it's not their biggest dream in life to become a film composer. So they apply their style to film. There was when Johan Johansson, who was a minimalist, experimental Icelandic composer, and when he scored Theory of Everything, it was a very conventional score. Traditional romantic strings and woodwinds piano score, and most people who know Johan's music, they were, what's this? What's this rubbish, more or less? But that, of course, was what the film called for. But I don't think that when you hear, I think Alexandre Desplat might be the most successful of the European composers right now, and he is extremely passionate about film and film music, and has always been.
Yes,
but
definitely.
I think that might be an exception, because most of these other guys that we see are doing big things, they come from a different musical world to begin with, and that's more where the reason for their success is, rather than them coming from here. Maybe also, I mean, film music isn't that huge of a tradition in Europe as it is in Hollywood. We have some fantastic composers here, but it's much more common that they work in concert music or in jazz or rock in other areas, maybe even more than they do in film. So the cross-pollination thing is I think is key there.
Interesting. All right, so we have another question from one of the students, Chris, who's a graduate student in the jazz program. We have we have a really good music school at Queens College. It's Aaron Copland School of Music. It's a separate school within the college, and I was actually in the first graduating class of the Aaron Copland School of Music in 1982. But about 20 years ago, Jimmy Heath and Roland Hanna started, and one of the professors there, Howard Brofsky, they started a graduate jazz program, and we're on the second set of teachers now, and we attract students from all over the world. And it's really an amazing program. And Chris is an American, but we get students. I've had students from literally everywhere. They take my class, some of my classes as electives. But anyway, that was just a tangential. Yeah. So Chris asks, do you ever use non-musical sources to help in organizing your harmonic, rhythmic, or melodic material? And then a secondary question is, how do you structure your time on a daily basis to be effective and productive? Thanks for your insights. That's actually, I think the more information that people get from different people about how they structure their time is very helpful, because everybody has a different way that they do it. But do you ever use non-musical sources to help in organizing your material?
Not sure about that. Maybe. Define non-musical. Isn't everything musical?
So Chris, you want to ask? Define that?
I guess I was just thinking if he ever uses like abstractions from music, like things about numbers or shapes or forms or things that aren't generally considered, directly.
Oh, Yeah.
musical necessarily.
I see. Usually not for choral music. I've done it a couple of times when I've been writing other things, but they tend to be more on the experimental side. I was doing with my label work. I was doing this. I was doing a playlist today to promote some music, and that playlist was an idea I had because of the most popular show now on Netflix is this new show about chess. It's about a woman who is a great chess player, and of course that made me think, what if there is a system in the chess, that one could apply to music, and you could use the one of the famous games between Kasparov and Karpov and do a piece out of that, how they move their different movements, and there is a way to do a musical system in that. Of course, such ideas happen, but in terms of doing music that's based on either scripture or poems, it's usually much more intuitive and not that intellectual a process, I think.
So then the other bit of that is, how do you structure your time on a daily basis? Because actually you have to juggle many balls. I mean, you've got a family, right? And you've got, you're a concert promoter. You're also have a label, and you're composing music. So you got a lot of stuff going on at once, right? And supposed to have a personal life as well,
Yeah. Well, I think I'm the wrong guy to answer that question. I happen to be extremely. I'm well organized, of course, but I'm not the kind of person who, starts writing at 8 in the morning, have a break at 9:30 and a coffee, and then I'm not that kind of person. I'm one of my great advantages, and one of the biggest pitfalls as well is that I happen to be very driven by is lust a word you use in English if it's not a sexual connotation? Because that's what it's all about. I tend to go with the current energy and flow that I have, but I of course discovered that I needed to find some structure in that, because as you say, there's so many things going on at the same time, and also having kids and a family, and wanting to spend time with them. I have my office at home. I used to have my office in an office building a few kilometers from here. But the best thing that happened to me in terms of creativity was to move everything to our apartment. We have a pretty big apartment, so there's space. It means that I can easily travel between album production, administration, designing an album cover, writing a few bars at the piano of a piece that's in the works. Any kind of ideas that I have, there's freedom for the ideas to develop. The feeling when the idea is there and you're afraid that you're going to lose it, that the idea is only there for a minute, and then if you do something else, you're gonna forget about it.
That's where your phone comes in handy, because you can just sing it into the phone.
That's true,
right?
That's true, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I discovered that I don't have much of a structure every day, but I have a structure in a bigger sense, and that is, I made a priority, there's I came up with this idea of having a what do you call it, pyramid, where the bottom of that structure is everything related to my record label, which is the big chunk of work I do. It's my more or less my everyday work. Producing albums, releasing albums, distributing albums, mastering albums, doing the artwork, doing some of the promotion, doing playlists, every aspect of that. Actually, album production is a lot of fun and what I spend most time doing. And then that's the big layer. On top of that is concert producing, which is also something quite passionate for me to do. It's what I enjoy doing more than albums. It's more, gratifying to go out and see people enjoy the music in real life. You never get to see the people enjoy the music that you produce on albums, but if you can meet the people, there's more energy in that. And then on the small little triangle at the top is, of course, my own composition activities, and the priority goes obviously that way. So if there is a composition assignment for me, that stuff underneath goes away, and my priority is that. If there is no composition to do, but there is a concert production in the works, that's my priority. If none of those are, there's nothing going on there at the moment, then there is always the big chunk with the label. So that has become a model for me to, help me prioritize sometimes, which can be difficult when you have so many ideas and there's so much stuff you want to do. There's only 24 hours a day.
I think that's a common theme with anybody who's trying to exist as a creative artist today, especially if you're in an urban center where it's really expensive to live, is you have to balance all of these different things together in order to get everything to work. And it becomes very difficult at times where you've got too many things going on at once, and trying to prioritize and keep everybody happy and make sure you get stuff done and still pay the rent and things. It definitely is I'd say it's more of a modern day issue than it was 30 years ago, I think.
I agree.
It's definitely an issue because, most of the people that are graduate students, they're excellent performers on their instruments at this point, right? And I know, personally speaking, from my own life experience, that there was much more work in New York City as a freelance musician 20 and 30 years ago than there is now. If you were an orchestral player, I'm not saying you would you'd make a fortune, but there were lots of pickup orchestras where people were doing gigs fairly often. There was more recording work. There was, there was seasons were longer for different orchestral stuff. If you were a jazz player, you might have worked, like I said, in the studios. A lot of the brass players playing on albums and commercials and all sorts of stuff, and all that stuff is just getting less and less and less, and yet we're churning out more and more and more amazing musicians for less and less work. And so the way to get around that is to get your fingers in a lot of pies at the same time, which leads to the conundrum of trying to balance everything and keep up high quality and not give yourself a stroke from being overworked and undersleeping and stuff. Yes.
I think also it's very important to try and do things that you want to do, if that's possible. I mean, all of these three things that I mentioned, I'm passionate about all three of them. So if that's possible, try to focus on that stuff and believe in that stuff, because it's, I think that's gonna show in the end.
Donna, you had a question?
Yeah, I think that new gender roles have a lot to do with juggling our work these days. You know, before the women's lib movement, the second half of the 20th century, men did their professional work, and when they got home, the dinner was on the table, right? The clothes were in the closet, and the kids were put to bed by the wife. But women now want to share in professional life, so that means everybody has to share with family life at home, and it makes it hard for all of us to get all of our work done.
That's probably
that's
true.
Interesting.
I think I for me, I mean, it's always been that way, but in terms of the longer, as you said, if you look at it 50, 60 years or 100 years, that's certainly true. Absolutely. But then I think that any creative person, there's never enough hours. 24 hours is not enough.
Life is not long enough either, even though it's longer than ever. It's just not long enough.
Boulanger used to quote Michelangelo. I don't know if this is, she may have attributed it to him just because, but she said, he used to say, "You may have anything you want from me except my time for work."
That's great.
Yeah.
I'll use that.
So will I, actually. So, all right. So, anybody else, any students have any questions that they'd like to ask Michael?
I actually have a question.
Who's that?
So, in my
It's Ricardo.
film scoring,
Okay.
I have to admit, our last project, I had such a hard time actually getting started in our Loving Vincent project. So I just want to ask, like, what is your process in starting any film scoring project? Like, what is your decision making processes?
Okay, this is interesting because Unai has a similar question. How do you work when you compose? Do you start with melodic, harmonic, or rhythmic idea? Do you think the whole song, or do you compose by section? So I think both of those questions are actually the same thing. So
I think this is related to the whole, the fear we are all at a certain point in the project have to face, where we're not fully confident of where we are or what we can do or what we should do. I don't write film scores these days, but I'm in the process, and the pressure is there. Even if it's a big concert work, 40-minute, 45-minute concert work, the pressure is there. One of the things that a good friend of mine, Richard Bellis, maybe you know him. He's a film composer in Los Angeles, who is doing a lot of lectures around the world about the creative process. And we met at a couple of film music festivals, and he came to Sweden to do a lecture, which I didn't visit because I didn't have the time, because I was writing a requiem. And I had just, had this assignment. Let's say that happened 6 months earlier, that I was asked to write this requiem, and now I was 2 months away from the premiere, and I hadn't, written anything. And one of the best advices that I've ever had in that, when he came, he asked me, how are you doing? I'm a bit, I'm not, I feel very insecure. I told him. Oh, why is that? Well, I told you about this requiem that I'm going to write. It's a big piece, and it's it's big. It's for string orchestra. I haven't written a lot for strings before, and the structure, and I don't know, blah blah blah. And he said, "So you didn't write anything?" No, I didn't write anything. Not a single. There's not even a dot on a paper. But did you write anything in here? He said. Yeah, of course. The main theme is already done, and but it's all. I mean, basically everything is here, so you're fine. You already did 95% of the job, he said. And of course, that was not entirely true, because there is a lot of craftsmanship going into that. You have to be confident in the actual writing process if you're gonna be confident enough to spend 90% of the time just thinking about the actual writing and how you're going to do it, and then spend the final 10% actually doing it. But for me, it was very assuring that you're going to do fine. This is don't worry. If you have it in here and you know what you're going to do, you're going to do it. And it worked out fine. And I was, I delivered the piece on time, and it worked out. I didn't have to do any rewrites or anything. It was, it just worked beautifully. And maybe those 90% of the time that I spend with my own brain out and walking, taking long walks and being pretentious, maybe that actually paid off. I don't know.
Like Mozart playing billiards and then going home and writing the opera overture.
Well, it's preparation is the key. Preparation is the key to any successful endeavor. You spend so much time preparing, and then the actual execution will become much easier if you're really prepared. So, just a couple of things that I'd like to add to that. What you said there is, Unai wants to know about melodic. You start with melodic, harmonic, or rhythmic idea. And what I would say, Unai, is that it depends, and to not lock yourself into starting with one type of an idea. Anything can get you going. You could be walking down the street and you could hear a couple of car horns, and the rhythm from that can spark an idea in you. Or you could just, and also another thing for me is to stop thinking. And I mentioned this in last week's lecture about clearing your mind and being open to allowing, everything is out there. The whole universe is out there. All the music is out there. And you have to make your whole self an open receptacle, a vehicle for which it can come into you and get out of you, just come through you, And one of the ways to do that is to not pigeonhole yourself into any preconceptions. Like, I always start off with a rhythmic idea, or I always start off with a harmonic idea. I always start off with quiet and just getting my mind free and stop thinking. I made that point last week about how Chick Corea, somebody asked him once what he thinks about when he improvises, and he says nothing. I don't want to think about anything. I just want to be. And that's obviously different. But what he does when he improvises, he spontaneously composes something, right? So he's got all that years and decades of preparation and practice and conscious work away from the actual process of creating music that he trusts. And he's just an observer and allows the ideas to come through him. And then once you got the ideas out, then there's a lot of conscious crafting and putting things together. But it's that being open and having your mind calm and peaceful, and being an open receptacle, because the creativity is out there. Everything is out there, and you just have to. It's really. I know it sounds like new agey and everything, but it is. Yeah, Jimmy Heath called that comprovisation. Yeah, Jimmy was so great. Somebody made a comment about that. But anyway, Jimmy was a great teacher. I loved his classes. yeah, that's basically just to add on to what you were saying. You know, and then one last thing I wanted to say is that some people ask me sometimes what the best thing about my college education was, and was learning how to get lots of things done on time. Learning how to get huge amounts of work done on a deadline.
Mm-hmm.
That's like the most important thing I learned in college.
Mm. I can just as an example, I mentioned before that harmony is my like main priority in music. It's where I usually find most inspiration, and where ideas usually, you know, where they come. But when I did this requiem, it all started with the tune, the theme. The requiem, you know, we had this enormous, disastrous refugee crisis in Europe 5 years ago, and that was at the point where I was commissioned to do this, and I wanted to try to. I used all of the Latin requiem texts, but I provided small headlines for each of these movements that could be. As a secondary storyline that we would follow a family across the Mediterranean, and how they are torn apart, and you know how they are later reunited in the last parts of the requiem, and for that I needed a melody that was the theme for the family, which is akin to film scoring in a way. I mean, how you actually want to find that theme that defines the whole piece. And this is exactly what happened, because that theme that came to me when I was out taking a walk, and it developed through several mornings of walks, and after a few days it was there, and then all of the harmonic language for the rest of the 45 minutes came from that seed. So I think when you're doing any kind of piece, when you have the seed, when you have the small little thing that could be developed, it could be 3 notes, it could be a rhythmic motif, it could be like anything that you can then work from. That's the eureka moment when you get that. Sometimes you don't get that. I mean, it's a luxury when that happens. And if you write a lot of media music, sometimes that won't happen, but then you can fall back on technique. Because it's a technique, you know exactly what kind, if you're not asked to do something that's going to be pure, you know, extremely unique, you're asked to write music that's good quality, that works, that does the job, then you can fall back completely on technique. You know exactly, if you've done your homework, you know exactly what kind of octatonic scale you're going to use to create that science fiction sound that everyone loves. You know what kind of orchestration or instrumentation you're going to use. You can do that. It's textbook examples of how you do it. Then one day you get that unique idea that's going to set you apart from the others in terms of, you know, writing something unique. But we all know that all films, all TV shows, all game music is not about being unique. It's about doing the job at the right time, and, you know, elevate the story. It doesn't always have to be, you know, the defining moment of innovation. So I mean, you don't always have to be so. Sometimes ambition can stand in the way, I think, of being efficient and of doing the job. Sometimes you have to step back and just, you know, this is good enough. This is going to work.
Very interesting. All right, so we've had Mikael for exactly 90 minutes at this point. I think I really appreciate you coming here and staying up late. And I've really enjoyed talking to you and meeting you finally after all these years, face to face. And again, thank you so much for doing this. I know that everybody's appreciated this, and we'll stay in touch. And,
We will.
Yes.
Thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun. Any more questions? No.
Yeah.
I have something humorous.
Go ahead, Don.
What you both had to say was very meaningful and I think valuable for us to hold on to. I have something more mundane. Isaac Stern, the violinist, when someone asked him what he thinks of when he plays a concerto, he said, "I think about the corned beef sandwich that I'm going to have when I'm done."
Yeah, there you go. Everything doesn't have to be magical. It can just be about the sandwich.
Yeah, time to bake the donuts, as we used to say on Broadway. 8:05 every night. It's time to bake the donuts. There's a Dunkin' Donuts commercial in America that was popular about 20 years ago. Time to bake the donuts. So,
Okay.
So class, we're going to hang out for a few more minutes. I have a couple of things to go through. So if you just hang out for a second. So again, Michael,
Okay.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And one day we'll get to meet in person after this COVID is over and I can get to Europe one of these days.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Have a great day. Have a great night.
Thank you.